Oh, hello, Sam here, Reloved Guitars Workshop, back again with the Epiphone SG Special. I'll tell you what wasn't special about this was the tuners. They were grotty, so we replaced them with some tuners that I already had that came off a Gould semi-acoustic guitar, and when I changed those out for Wilkinson Easy Lock tuners, which are much better quality. So these Gould tuners are a step up again from the ones that came on this guitar. So I don't know what really was special about this SG. It's a pretty colour and it's nice, nice finish and all that, and fairly good Epiphone pickups. But as I say, kind of spoiled, I think it's fair to say, by these horrible tuners that they put onto it. Such a shame, really. Still, we've done the change out, and now in the process of just doing the last couple of bits. And I have a little note on here that says complete the setup by setting the action. Now on the nut and the bridge, we've done the action first, and I'm just checking this the action at the nut again, and it's still actually a little bit high. It's above what quite a bit above what I'd normally have it as. So I'm just going to give it a little bit of treatment here with my files. It should allow me to cut it down, cut the slot down a little lower. They don't feel like they're doing much in the way of cutting today. Once this is done, I'm going to take this away and pop it in the house, keep it nice and warm and dry, ready for selling. So, coming back to what we're doing here, this is one of the areas of the setup which is so often really wrong, and it's an area that it's not about, it's not cosmetic, or we're not doing this for fun. We're doing this because if the action of the string of the first fret is too high, it makes the guitar very hard to play, first of all, and secondly, it actually very often causes intonation problems, because if the string of the first fret is too high, you find yourself having to really push down hard and press very hard on those strings to finger the first few open chords that everyone learns to play when they're starting to play the guitar. And when this action over the first fret is too high, what you end up doing is squeezing so hard that you may have all the open strings in tune, but when you squeeze that D chord or whatever it is, it makes all of those notes slightly high or sharp, which means that the chord you're playing is going to sound awful, because it's comprised of some notes that are tuned to concert pitch and beautifully, perfectly tuned according to your tuner or whatever, and some notes that are now sharp because they're being squeezed very hard to make them touch that first fret. So that's very often caused by the action at the nut being set wrong. And what I mean by that is that the string isn't low enough down over that first fret, and that's what I'm doing here. And you can probably just about make out that I'm lowering each slot independently or individually using a combination of little kinds of files. I'll move on to the other ones in a moment. And we're using this fairly cheap, actually, welding nozzle cleaner file to do this, because as it happens, the expensive set I bought here, although they're perfectly matched supposedly for the 9-gauge strings, although they're supposed to be matched, they're actually slightly too small. They are either exactly the same as the string or a fraction microns smaller than the string gauge, which means that if I just use them as said, the strings stick, which is no good. So I'm using them slightly out of phase, so I'm using 11 where the 9 is, 16 where the 13 should be, and so on. But it works. So I'm just going to measure this. Now you might say, well, what distances am I going for? What clearances am I using here? And I'm using a 0.30 millimeter feeler gauge, good old-fashioned feeler gauge, under the string on the first fret. And actually, that's quite generous or conservative. I could comfortably take that down to 0.2, but it would have to be exactly accurate. Any lower than 0.2 and I'd be in trouble. It is dependent on the height of this. It will be much higher if this was higher. You wouldn't be able to get it down as low as 0.3 if this was really high. But based on having set this first to a workable playing action, I now know that 0.3, between 0.3 and 0.2 is a workable, good height to aim for over this first fret. I've got it with this first string, so now basically my task is to make the others work the same as that. And I'll keep my gauge handy, and I will use a combination of things here, but now I'm going to jump to my my nut slot file, because it's designed to do this, and it's a little bit more hungry, and it will do the job fairly quickly, perhaps a little bit quicker than the welding nozzle cleaner approach. You see that I'm taking the string up to roughly the right pitch to test the height. It doesn't need to be in tune exactly, but it needs to be under the right tension just to make sure it sits perfectly in that slot. And then I see that it isn't low enough yet, so I'll go back and cut some more using this little file, which is supposedly for the E string, but it's not working like that, as I mentioned before. So I'm just going to keep on going at this string until this slot, I should say, until I'm down to the 0.3 of a millimeter that I was aiming for, and when I've got all of them down to that, what I'll end up with then is a guitar that's much easier to play, and doesn't force the strings to go sharp when playing notes or chords down here, and that's a big deal. It's quite incredible how much of a mess it can make, and how important it is, and how, I think, overlooked it seems to be by a lot of manufacturers, certainly, and presumably, judging by the fact that a huge percentage of the guitars I've had through here suffer from that problem, it's not only overlooked by the manufacturers, it's also overlooked by the retailers, which is kind of funny, really, because it's I would say that this issue here, the thing I'm doing now, has probably the biggest effect on anything when it comes to playing the guitar. So there isn't one single other part of this that can make the guitar so unplayable as this that I'm dealing with now. And I know that from tough experience, I've had guitars where I haven't been able to work out why they're unplayable, or they just don't seem to stay in tune. And that's the experience it gives you. It just you'll experience it as a feeling of just not being able to get this guitar into tune. Now, it isn't technically what's happening, but that's what it feels like. So, having had a few guitars like that, and having put them right this way, I'm a kind of a, what's the word, evangelist for it now. Really am all for getting this bit right, so you can have the best possible playing action. I'm taking it easy. I'm doing it very, very slowly so I don't run any risk of overcutting it. You know, taking it slowly is the way to go. Tiny fraction by fraction. And when we get to the correct height over the first fret, in this case our very conservative 0.3 of a millimetre, we'll stop and move to the next string. And then I'll start measuring the gap from the other side, so I can keep the pressure. The danger is I don't want to take all the what do you call it, force or tension off the strings, because then I'll relax the neck in the wrong way. So I'll just get this one right and then I'll load those strings back up. We're not far off this one, and I can see by just pressing the feeler gauge flat, and I can just see, has this string got any more room to press down on the feeler gauge? And it has a little bit, so we know we're close. One more little go and we'll probably be there. You see, more time than less, because you can always take a bit more off. You can't put it back on once you messed it up. You can use a special trick with super glue and baking powder, but it's a bit of a faff. And actually, I have to say, with a black nut, it's not very good looking, because when you use super glue and baking soda, it makes a really solid kind of cement that's very useful, which does fill in any mess you've made, but it doesn't look so great on a black nut. So I think I'm just about there with this one. Can't see hardly any more. Tiny fraction of movement still left in there. As I said, by choosing 0.3 as my target, it's quite a conservative action. Gives me lots of room. What you'll find is, if you want to know where that figure came from, why 0.3, if you were to take any old guitar with any action at all, doesn't really matter what the action was, and if you were to put on onto that guitar a capo on the first fret, and then measure the distance between the new, the string and the new first fret, which is really the second fret, you'll see that that is around, with an action set to a normal kind of whatever, roughly, your 1 or 2 millimeters at this end. You'll find that the gap, when you put a capo on, is about 0.2 or just under, in fact a little bit less. But what it means is that you notice that with a capo on, this guitar plays really easily. Most guitars do, and it proves to you that with a clearance of 0.2 or slightly less on the first fret, you can play perfectly well everywhere, and it makes the guitar really playable. So that's what we're doing. We're aiming to get somewhere close to that. Now, we're not going for 0.2, we're going for 0.3 to give us plenty of margin. But you'll find that even with 0.3 over the first fret, it's a much more playable guitar. And also, you'd be surprised that the difference between that the first height, the original height, and the new height we get could be something like, well, if I tried this out now, the one under there now might be something like 0.5 or 0.6. So we're halving the distance that's there. It's a tiny distance anyway, so you don't really notice, but it's significant in the sense we're taking it down to half of what it was, and that is enough to change the way it intonates. Okay, so it's quite an important little action we're doing here. Now these, I have to be careful with these treble strings, because they go really quickly, as in they seem to get down to the right height surprisingly quickly, and they can take you by surprise. And before you know it, you're buzzing on the deck, and that's really not what we want. So I'm going to be even more careful with this in a way than I was with the previous ones. So as I say, this little operation kind of feels risky, making quite a big change to how it plays, but if you think about it, really the most you're risking is a nut, okay? Because you can buy another nut for £5 or £6 if you want, or tenner if you're going to go for something like a tusk nut. And if you get it completely wrong, the worst you have to do is put another nut on. So I highly recommend that you have a go at this yourself. If you own your own guitar, get it right, and if you get it wrong, just have another nut ready. Be prepared to knock this one off with a blunt screwdriver or something like that, flat blade screwdriver, just to take the truss rod cover off, and give it a sharp thing, and it'll break the glue and jump off very quickly. And start again, you know, and so you know, even if you screwed up a couple of nuts in the process of learning, you've learned something, and you've changed the way your guitar plays so significantly it's worth a couple of nuts, excuse the expression. So we're getting there slowly, but it isn't quick. Still quite a bit of a drop down onto that feeler gauge. So loosen off, cut some more, tighten up, check it, come back, do some more. I can't underestimate the benefit of doing this. Such a profound difference to how it plays. But, you know, you've got to be careful with it. You've got to make sure the slots aren't great big ragged holes that allow the string to buzz around and not make good contact. You've got to be preferably with not necessarily the most expensive tools, but the right tools. You can't be shoving the same size implement in there and hoping it will do the job. You need to be able to have a different gauge for each string you're working on. Now I'm going to stop with that one, it feels about right to me. Moving on now, I'll just put away this one and go to my next one. Actually, what's interesting is what am I doing? No, it's not interesting, it's right. I am using the slightly larger ones. I thought I'd fooled myself for a minute there. So, yeah, can't underestimate the scale of the difference this makes. And I said, you know, I kind of learned this by doing it and finding out with a guitar or two that just wouldn't play properly. And it does feel, when you get this right for the first time, it feels like you've been given back a new guitar, particularly if it's one that you like the look of but it just wouldn't play right. And I still can't help but wonder why it's so overlooked at the manufacturers or the shops. Yeah, I mean, you can see one reason why, because it takes quite a bit of fiddling around time to get it right. Fiddling around time in the industry or the business of making and selling guitars is money. But it makes such a difference. I can't imagine that you could get away with not doing it. Anyway, I did see just recently a product you could buy called, I can't remember what it was, I keep forgetting the name, but anyway, it's an intonated nut that's supposed to solve this problem. But I somehow I don't get how that can work. I get the idea of somebody thinking, okay, you'll intonate the nut as well as the bridge, but the worry for me about that is that the nut is subject to so many, how should we say, variables. You know, the fact that it's glued into place on top of some old glue or a bit of wood that's not, that's not as level as any other bit of wood on another guitar. It's all very vague, and how can the manufacturer of this staggered compensated nut predict the other variables, like what height the nut will sit? So there's no point telling me that you've got a nut that's way too high but it's compensated so that it really will somehow or fix the sharp note problem resulting from having to squeeze much harder to get the strings to touch the frets. If the manufacturer can't tell how high that's going to sit on the actual neck that it's put on, how can it compensate for it? I'm very sceptical about that, I've got to say. And some people I've heard people say they fitted them and they feel they've made some difference. I, on the other hand, haven't fitted them, but what I've done is I've done plenty of adjusting it this way. And of course, although it takes longer, I've got full confidence in doing this way because the nut is glued in place now. It's not going anywhere, nothing's changing. It's not a variable anymore, it's fixed. Now what we're doing is we're taking the strings down to the right height in the right radius, because I'm measuring the height of each one. It's not like one set height all the way across, it's a curve of the strings. They're all going to end up with 0.2 between the bottom of the string and the fret. That's the first one's done, by the way. We're on the final one now. So to me this way is a much more accurate way of doing it. And actually I can't help but think it's probably the only way of doing it. There's a number of reasons why that compensated nut idea, I can't see how it can actually solve this problem for all kinds of technical reasons, but I won't get into it because I don't want a war. I don't want a war. It's not important enough. I know that this works and I'll keep on doing this. And I know that 0.3 is a safe margin and it gives you a good result. If I'm feeling very adventurous and I've got plenty of spare nuts, matron, I might even go down to 0.2 if I'm feeling like I've got loads of time on my hands to get it right. But in this case I'm not. I'm going to stick with a safe 0.3. Still has a little bit of room on this one. And it's interesting because I can measure with the feeler gauge, but I can also tell you just by looking at the shadow in this current situation where I'm doing this work, I can compare the shadow of that string to the other strings over the first fret, or maybe not the shadow, it's probably better to say the reflection. So I can see now that the shadow is still a little bit high, but that will do me. So there we are. I'm going to just go back and tune these. Do we have a string that's in tune? Okay, that will be it. I'm just going to check the intonation on this one, which I think we already did. Sounding better than it was before I did that, so that's great. So now it's special, finally, but look how much work we've had to put into it to make it special. Thank you, Epiphone. And now I'm going to take off my label, job done, into the house and ready for packaging and delivery to you, my friend. I'm just going to put it down into the guitar stand down here. So that's great, that's that one done. I've also got the Encore Les Paul copy down there done as well, ready to go. So the only one of this trio that needs catching up with is this one here, which is a different video, so I'll stop and start the video for this, but I've just got one more to do. Okay.